Right, so finally, after some £2.4 million of membership dues have been wasted, Keir Starmer has called it quits. Not on his leadership, unfortunately, though. Sorry if you come here hoping it was that. But when it comes to wasting money, Labour have less and less of it, thanks to driving away so many of their supporters and members. Wasting such a huge sum of cash on former Labour staffers is not best use of campaign funds. Now, this isn't another example of him paying people off either, because this is all about the Labour leaks report again, and Starmer's incessant, appalling pursuit of people who essentially blew the whistle on the people within the Labour Party machine who had been working to undermine the Corbyn leadership and his team from within. The people who genuinely are to blame for having another 5 years of the Tories with all the pain that has brought. A report into this was produced, intended for publication, showing what had been going on and, crucially, what the then leadership of the Labour Party were genuinely doing to try and combat that, along with their work in bringing down the backlog of racism complaints that had been sat on by the previous administration. Instead of acting upon what the report found, Starmer sought to quash it. When it got leaked, hence the nickname for it, Starmer has instead pursued years of investigation, dragging people to court he lacked evidence on, and has now finally, at last, given up on it all. Right, so the work of the Labour Party's Governance and Legal Unit in relation to Anti-Semitism 2014 to 2019 report, as it was officially called, although it's far better known as the Labour Leaks report, it's a lot easier to say after all, well, the court case brought against 5 former Corbyn staffers is now finally over. By way of background, this was meant to be submitted as part of an investigation by the Equalities Watchdog as a defence against all the accusations of anti-Semitism the then Corbyn administration had made against it. The evidence the party itself had compiled in relation to their tackling of the issue, as well as other incidents of bullying and harassment, mistreatment that had been evidenced and documented by them as part of their investigation that culminated in this report, the Labour Leaks report. In the end, it never got the authorisation to be submitted, though. Change of leadership came in, saw that get blocked. It was Starmer's faction having the finger of blame pointed at them after all. So shortly after Starmer became leader, it ended up getting leaked instead as a whistleblower event to make sure the truth got out there, and we learned of just how dysfunctional Labour HQ really were and how they were actively working against Corbyn's administration, misappropriating funds from seats they could win to shore up favoured right-wingers, the infamously abusive WhatsApps that were sent, many of which were reproduced across social media, particularly aimed at people like Diane Abbott. The leaked report also forced Starmer's hand to investigate the claims that were made within it, though, which led to the investigation that was led by Martin Forde KC and resulted in the repeatedly blocked from publication, and it wasn't hard to see why in the end, Forde report, which Starmer hoped would pin all blame on the left and did the complete opposite in large part. Starmer has ignored the report and its recommendations ever since. Fundamentally, though, the Labour Leaks report was an 860-page document evidencing the party machine, right-wing as it was, despite Corbyn being leader, working harder to undermine Corbyn however they could than try to win an election. Quite conceivably, the actions they took could well in no small part have cost Labour the 2017 general election. Now, Starmer has blown ridiculous sums of money to no avail in trying to find out who actually leaked this report, and has been involved in a court case against 5 former Jeremy Corbyn staffers who his regime accused of leaking the report, but for which there is no evidence. He's a lawyer, let's not forget, former head of the CPS, my God, he does like to remind us, and he's insisted on fighting a case that he's got no evidence for years now, but finally, at last, he's thrown in the towel, after having blown £2.4 million on it and getting absolutely nowhere. Starmer's Labour have accused these 5 former staffers in desperate hopes it could all be pinned on a rotten lefty from Corbyn's time as the leaker. Far more important to Starmer seemingly than actually acting on the recommendations and the cases of abuse both the Labour Leaks report and the Forde report that followed revealed. Starmer has had thousands spent on forensic investigators, no less, to try and identify the leaker or leakers, and that failed. He spent thousands trying to get an injunction against one of those accused, Corbyn's former Chief of Staff Carrie Murphy, to reveal her privileged emails to her lawyer to get them published, and that failed. Even the Information Commissioner's Office investigated to see if the leaker could be identified, and they couldn't do so either. Now, one aspect of this that arguably didn't help Starmer much, aside from the whole you can't prove any of these people leaked anything, was the apparent relative inexperience of Labour's then Director of Legal Affairs, the guy who was actually spending the cash. The guy who was actually blown £2.4 million. It was a chap called Alex Barros-Curtis. However, if he was so inexperienced, the lack of oversight of his activities says more about the current Labour regime and their incompetence. The most appalling expenditure being £500,000 of that figure spent on a single hearing, and that was trying to access Carrie Murphy's emails to her lawyer. My goodness me, I hope they threw the book at this chap for blowing so much money, so much party cash. You might be thinking, well, they certainly look to move him on. He's been handed the safe seat at Cardiff West in the general election, so you might well see him in Parliament next. Another example of Starmer's Labour's idea of a high-quality candidate. Here's an excerpt from Politics Home on this appointment and the absolute mess Starmer has made overseeing this farce. Commenting on the news that the parties have come to a resolution, Mish Rahman, a member of the party's National Executive Committee, accused Labour of spending millions of pounds in members' money on pursuing the case so far that could have been spent on the general election. As with his ham-fisted targeting of Diane Abbott and other left-wing women of colour, this pointless and vindictive failed lawsuit is another example of Starmer allowing his bully boys to get carried away with their war on the left when it's clearly not in the party's electoral or financial interest to do so, Rahman added. A Labour MP and former shadow cabinet member criticised the selection of Alex Barros-Curtis, the head of Labour's legal unit, as a Labour candidate in the general election. He will stand in Cardiff West after being chosen directly by the NEC. This is a huge embarrassment for the party. This official, who was appointed to a top job at Labour HQ by Starmer, has wasted eye-watering sums which could have made the difference in key seats in this election, the MP said. But the Labour leadership has now rewarded him with a safe seat with which he has no connection. This is yet another case of faction first before the interests of either the party or the country. Yet Mish Rahman has nailed it, as has the anonymous Labour MP and former shadow cabinet minister. What an absolute waste of time and money, when actually who leaked that report should never have been the main issue. The contents of the bloody thing were 860 pages of it. Starmer ignored them, and then ignored the report he was forced to commission into them, because the blame got saddled on the Labour right and he didn't like it. He actually went as far as banning MPs from speaking to Forde following the publication of his report. And indeed, the client media ignored the report as well and completely ignored Martin Forde. Thankfully, Al Jazeera didn't. But if Forde had, as Starmer hoped, laid the blame for it at Corbyn's feet, I guarantee the media reaction would have been very, very different. It's also another valid point concerning Barros-Curtis that as a reward for his epic levels of wasting both time and money, that he gets handed a safe seat in South Wales when he's based in London. But getting rewarded at all for such epic failure is stupefying. In what way is this your high quality of candidates, as once again it proves to just be another factional parachuting in of a Starmer loyalist, which seems to be the only prerequisite required? Oh well, it's only Wales, I suppose. Someone else who has weighed in on all this appalling waste of party cash has actually been Martin Forde himself, who's commented and said, "It is a great shame that money has been spent on legal fees that could have been spent on the general election." Echoing Mish Rahman's sentiments there, completely true. For voters, though, they'll look at this epic waste of funds and think, well, if Starmer is prepared to blow party cash like that on nothing more than a vindictive 4-year-long pursuit against staff who worked for his predecessor, who is clearly still living rent-free in his head, what will he be like with the public finances then? And if you're fully aware of the fact that those fiscal rules he and his George Osborne wannabe Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves keep bleating on about aren't worth a bean, political choices they've opted to make rather than anything resembling economic sense, you might be even more worried about that. In fact, it was only a few months ago that Rachel Reeves was being told by her own economics advisor to ditch her fiscal rules, senseless as they are. And you can get all the details of that in this video recommendation if Labour's economic credibility is something you really want to know more about right now. And I hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.